Two more journalists have been detained in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa, increasing the number of reporters and media workers jailed since last week to 13. The move has been seen by some as a crackdown on critical voices.
Last year, the US-based lobby group, the Committee to Protect Journalists, called Ethiopia one of the worst jailers of reporters. And now a new wave of arrests has seen more than a dozen journalists and media workers detained in a little over a week. But it's not only journalists who are being targeted. On Monday, the authorities in Amara, Ethiopia's second most populous region, said they had jailed more than 4,500 individuals. Among them were activists, military and militiamen, and academics. The arrests have since continued. Amara spokesperson told the media that he doesn't have the latest figures, but the security office told local media that close to 2,000 people have additionally been detained. It comes amid concerns that the continued operation could lead to further tensions and even violence in a country blighted by civil war and ethnic conflicts.
Well, for some reaction, we're now joined by William Oloo, who's the Secretary of the Congress of African Journalists and the Chairperson of the Kenya Correspondents Association. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program. Your initial thoughts and reaction to what's happening in Ethiopia as we're seeing this number of journalists being arrested increasing?
The situation is worrying. We are monitoring the situation in Ethiopia. We have multiple sources that indicate that possibly about 16 journalists and media workers. Actually, there's a report from the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission that indicate that there are about 16 journalists and media workers that have been arrested over the last 1 week or more, or are being held, and some of them are being held under perhaps ungazetted detention facilities. So the situation, my initial thoughts would be that the situation is worrying. It has implications on press freedom and freedom of expression.
What are you hearing in terms of why they've been arrested?
I think that the situation, what we are hearing is that from different sources, the authorities are actually looking at the questions around injustices. Some of the journalists and bloggers or other media workers have been reporting on injustices, especially in the Amhara region. And some of these, I think the authorities are afraid of information that is getting out about some of the atrocities and that kind of thing. So that clampdown is essentially to stop news and information from getting out. But we also hear that there are diplomatic efforts by different agencies, UN agencies and the international community, to try to talk quietly, with the Ethiopian authorities to ensure that this does not escalate.
All right. I mean, it is particularly worrying given that Ethiopia's state-appointed human rights body itself is calling on the release on these journalists, so that even a state body calling for these journalists to be released must be very, very serious, even inside the country, with people who would have thought might be supporting government.
Yeah, that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission can come out so strongly. I mean, the statement by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is very strong. It's saying that the detention of journalists, some of them in very unclear circumstances, sends a wrong message, and especially in terms of the fact that there are no explanations about why some are being held, and some apparently are being arrested by. Some apparently are being arrested by people who are not necessarily identified as clearly, state security agents. So it's not known whether these are militias or something like that. Yeah. So the Human Rights Commission is worried like everybody else. but we also hear that the Ethiopian Media Authority is not taking up the cases of some of those ones that are not registered by the Commission. So it means that even where journalists who are very well known, or bloggers and or media workers, then they are not being assisted by the Ethiopian Media Authority because they are not registered. So registration is being taken as a way of validating your participation or as the license for you to practice. Yet, I think under international laws, the freedom of the press, the freedom of the media, this does not necessarily require the licensing of authorities for you to operate. And indeed, you don't have to be registered for you to be helped. When, for example, you are in danger, you are being arrested or being molested by either security agencies or, like in this case, what we hear, certain, militias.
All right, so what is concerning is that there's an increase recently, but this has been a problem over a period of time, hasn't it? I mean, I was looking at Reporters Without Borders, RSF's annual report, and since Abiy Ahmed took over as Prime Minister, Ethiopia's ranking has dropped 40 places. They're now at 114 out of 180 countries, but that is a huge drop, which points to increasing oppression over a period of time at a significant level.
Yeah, actually, when the new Prime Minister came, Abiy, there was hope that there was going to be quite some reform, and there have been indeed some reforms that have been going on. We were in Addis Ababa, when we had the World Press Freedom Day held in Addis Ababa about 3 years ago. And the situation was very promising. The Prime Minister came, he had a very jovial discussion with the delegates and across Africa, and we had a lot of hope because he talked about the opening up of space. But then, of course, once the conflicts began, like the Tigray and all these others, the challenges to the federal authorities, then suddenly we saw a clampdown on the civic space, and which included press freedom. So that essentially is worrying, and I think the ranking will obviously, be worse as we move on, perhaps this year, next year, unless the situation changes significantly. Maybe if the diplomatic efforts that I have established are going on succeed in some way, and the hostilities within Ethiopia also drop, then it's possible perhaps the government may feel sufficiently, confident to try to continue with the press freedom reforms that had been initiated.
Given how state media operates across the continent, it's very difficult for journalists working for state broadcasters, state newspapers to speak freely. Do you get a chance to speak to them off the record, and what are they saying to you in Ethiopia in particular?
I have, even this evening, I've spoken to a number, I've been in touch with a number who do not want to be quoted. And they say that the situation is such that there's a lot of self-censorship. So nobody wants to be quoted on anything. So they just say it's off the record. And this because based on trust, because we have established a lot of, contacts. And so you find that there are people willing to tell you, but this is off the record, and they are saying that the situation is worrying. And even at individual media houses, there's a lot of censorship. They don't want the authorities to come to them, because in certain instances over the last 2-3 months, some of the media people who have been detained or arrested have been arrested in media houses. So the worry is there, and the different sources that we speak to indicate that the situation is extremely difficult and has created fear.
Do you get a sense also that private media is getting diminished access to state voices for their publications?
This is true. I mean, for over the last 3-4 months, let me say 6 months or so, we were involved in a project, it's called COVID-19 Response in Africa. And a part of, we were covering Kenya, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. And we got the sense, even from civil society, that getting government voices to speak was extremely difficult because government officials were afraid to speak on COVID. They were afraid to speak on the conflict in Tigray, and even within Addis Ababa and also in the Oromia areas. When the journalists eventually got out of Addis Ababa to go to the provinces, some of them were treated with a lot of hostility by the regional governments because it was thought that, there's a way they look at the people, especially media coming from Addis Ababa, especially private media. They are looked at with some hostility. So this has constrained the ability of the private media to get information. And given the fact that government officers are equally afraid, so then there are no official sources, there's no communication that can come, and therefore some of the news cannot be deemed credible, because if the authorities are not able to speak, then the authorities themselves can treat your news as speculation.
Mr. Oloo, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. Let's hope that the situation improves for our fellow journalists in Ethiopia in the coming days and weeks, and the ones that are in jail are released sooner rather than later. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much. We'll also continue monitoring this, and of course, we will add our voices to the call for, for the authorities to release the detained journalists.
Asante sana. Kwaheri.
Asante sana.